Former Duchess of York Sarah Ferguson has been labelled desperate and a degenerate in the latest instalment of the Epstein files, with emails between her and Jeffrey Epstein revealing she was regularly chasing money and attention from the convicted pedophile.
Sarah, Duchess of York, was photographed in France having her toes sucked by a man that was not her husband.
For years, Sarah Ferguson, known to the world as Fergie, was one of the most recognizable faces connected to the British royal family. To many people in the late 1980s and early 1990s, she represented something new, a lively, modern woman stepping into an institution known for tradition and restraint. She was seen as approachable, warm, and different from the image many expected of royalty. The public watched her marriage to Prince Andrew with fascination, and for a while, she became a symbol of energy and openness within the royal world. But the way she is spoken about today carries a very different tone. Instead of admiration, her name is now tied to scandal, financial desperation, and deeply damaging connections that refuse to disappear. Recently, her name has appeared alongside Jeffrey Epstein, a name that has become impossible to separate from public disgust, suspicion, and outrage. The woman who once stood at the center of royal attention is now more often mentioned alongside disgrace, controversy, and the collapse of everything that once made her admired. How did someone once so loved become someone so heavily criticized? Long before she became known around the world as the Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson grew up on the edges of a social circle that occasionally overlapped with the British royal family. Born in 1959, she came from a family that was familiar with the culture of British aristocracy. Though her own life was far from the structured image people often associate with royal upbringing, her father worked closely within elite sporting circles connected to polo, a world that sometimes intersected with royal life. As a child, Sarah spent time around horses, competitions, and the social gatherings that surrounded them. She developed a personality that many people later described as energetic and outgoing. Riding horses, competing, and moving through these environments gave her confidence and a sense of independence at a young age. But her childhood also included moments that shaped her emotional outlook. When her parents divorced during her teenage years, the change had a lasting effect. Her mother eventually moved abroad, leaving Sarah and her siblings to grow up primarily with their father. Friends later suggested that this period contributed to a deeper sensitivity to rejection and belonging, feelings that sometimes followed her into adulthood. Unlike many public figures who later marry into royalty, Sarah did not follow a traditional academic path. Her formal education ended relatively early, and she entered the workforce in a series of modest roles. She worked as a secretary and later in publishing and public relations. These early jobs were not glamorous, but they introduced her to professional environments where personality, adaptability, and communication mattered. Those who knew her during these years often remembered her as lively, sociable, and eager to make connections. She had a natural ability to attract attention in a room, not through formality, but through humor and openness. In a social environment where reserve was often valued, her spontaneity stood out. The turning point in her life came through a connection that had existed quietly in the background for years, through shared social circles linked to polo and aristocratic families. Sarah had known Prince Andrew since they were young. Over time, that acquaintance gradually developed into something closer. In 1986, their relationship led to a moment that changed her life completely. Their wedding at Westminster Abbey was watched across the world for millions of viewers. The ceremony carried the feeling of a modern fairy tale. Sarah Ferguson, a lively young woman known to friends simply as Fergie, suddenly became the Duchess of York. The public response was immediate and enthusiastic. Many people felt she brought a different energy to the royal family, where some members of the monarchy appeared distant or formal. Fergie seemed approachable. She laughed easily, spoke openly, and appeared comfortable engaging with ordinary people. Over the next several years, she settled into royal life while also becoming a mother. The births of Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie further strengthened her public image as a devoted parent. Photographs of her with her children helped shape a perception of warmth that contrasted with the more restrained image often associated with royal motherhood. At the same time, she began participating in charitable work and public initiatives. She spoke candidly about personal struggles such as weight and body image, something rarely discussed openly by public figures at the time. For many women, this honesty made her relatable. Media coverage often framed her as a symbol of a more modern kind of royal woman, someone who could acknowledge imperfections while still representing tradition. She seemed to represent resilience, humor, and an ability to adapt to a world that had suddenly become very public. For a while, the image held to many people watching from outside the palace gates. Fergie appeared to embody a rare combination: a royal figure who still felt unmistakably human. For a time, the public image surrounding Sarah Ferguson remained largely positive. She was still seen as lively, approachable, and different from the more formal tone of the royal household. But beneath that image, pressures were quietly building. Royal life brought expectations that were often difficult to navigate. Prince Andrew's naval career meant that he spent long periods away from home, sometimes for months at a time. During those stretches, Sarah was left to manage public duties and raise their young children largely on her own. The distance placed strain on the marriage, though it was rarely discussed openly at the time. At the same time, the British tabloid press was becoming increasingly aggressive in its coverage of royal figures. Sarah, with her expressive personality and visible emotions, often became an easy target. Stories about her appearance and weight appeared frequently in newspapers. Headlines referring to her as Fat Fergie circulated widely, turning personal struggles into public entertainment. Those moments revealed a growing tension between the woman herself and the image expected of a royal figure. She had entered the royal family with a sense of spontaneity and warmth, but the environment around her demanded discipline, distance, and constant scrutiny. Over time, the contrast began to show. The first serious controversy emerged in 1992, when photographs surfaced of Sarah vacationing in the south of France with American financial advisor John Bryan. The images were widely circulated and became a subject of intense public attention for the royal family, which placed great importance on discretion and reputation. The incident created significant discomfort. That same year later came to be described by Queen Elizabeth II as an annus horribilis, a difficult period for the monarchy marked by several personal and institutional crises within that broader climate. The situation surrounding Sarah's marriage became increasingly fragile. By 1996, the separation that had already been visible for some time formally ended in divorce. The settlement she received was modest compared with the scale of royal wealth, and she also lost the formal style of Her Royal Highness. Although she remained close to her daughters and maintained a respectful relationship with Prince Andrew, her position within the royal structure changed significantly. After the divorce, Sarah faced a different kind of challenge. Without the financial support and institutional structure that had once surrounded her, she began searching for ways to support herself independently. Business ventures, media appearances, and endorsement deals followed, but not all of them succeeded. Financial difficulties gradually appeared, though they were often handled quietly at first. Looking back, these developments might appear like early warnings, but at the time, many observers still viewed them as temporary setbacks rather than signs of deeper problems. To supporters, Sarah Ferguson remained the same energetic personality who had once brought warmth to royal life. The small cracks were there, but they were easy to overlook. And then, everything changed. The moment when Sarah Ferguson's reputation shifted most dramatically did not arrive all at once. Instead, it unfolded through a series of events that gradually reshaped how the public viewed her. By the late 2000s, Ferguson was already living outside the formal structure of the royal family. She was no longer a working royal, and much of her life revolved around business ventures, media appearances, and attempts to maintain financial stability. For years, she had tried to rebuild a career through writing, television projects, and public speaking. Some of those efforts brought attention and income, but others struggled to find lasting success. Behind the scenes, financial pressures continued to follow her. In 2010, a major controversy emerged that would become one of the defining moments of her public life. A British tabloid newspaper published footage from an undercover meeting in which Ferguson appeared to offer access to Prince Andrew in exchange for money. During the recorded conversation, she was shown accepting a cash payment as part of what she described as an introduction to the prince. The footage spread quickly through international media for many observers. The images raised serious questions about judgment and boundaries. The idea that a former member of the royal family might appear to sell access to a royal figure created immediate concern within both the press and the public. Critics argued that the situation blurred the line between personal financial need and the dignity expected of someone who had once represented the monarchy. Ferguson responded soon after the footage was released. She issued a public apology, describing the situation as a serious error in judgment and acknowledging that she had been under significant financial strain at the time. In interviews that followed, she said the meeting had been a mistake and that she regretted the impression it created. Even so, the damage to her reputation was difficult to reverse. The controversy reopened earlier questions about her financial situation and the business relationships she had developed over the years. Media outlets revisited past reports of debt, failed ventures, and personal borrowing. What had once appeared as scattered financial difficulties now began to form a broader narrative in the public eye. Around the same time, her connection to financier Jeffrey Epstein also began to attract attention. Epstein, who had long-standing relationships with several high-profile figures, became the subject of growing scrutiny over allegations of serious crimes. Reports later indicated that Epstein had helped settle part of a financial debt Ferguson owed during a difficult period. Although the payment itself was relatively small compared with the scale of the broader Epstein case, the association carried symbolic weight. In an environment where Epstein's activities were increasingly condemned, even indirect connections to him became a source of controversy for many public figures. For Ferguson, the situation reinforced a perception that her financial difficulties had led her into relationships that appeared questionable in hindsight. Public reactions were divided. Some critics argued that the pattern suggested poor judgment over many years. They pointed to the 2010 recording as evidence that she had crossed an ethical line in trying to solve financial problems. For them, the incident reflected a broader concern about how royal connections might be used for personal gain. Others viewed the situation with more sympathy. Supporters noted that Ferguson had been largely separated from the royal institution for years and was attempting to build an independent life. They emphasized that the financial pressures she faced were real and that the 2010 incident, while serious, did not represent criminal behavior. In interviews and public appearances, Ferguson often spoke openly about the emotional toll the controversy had taken on her. She described periods of deep embarrassment and acknowledged that the incident had forced her to confront difficult questions about trust and judgment. Despite the criticism, she continued to pursue work. Over the following years, she wrote children's books and historical novels, participated in television projects, and maintained a presence in charitable work. In particular, she became involved in initiatives connected to children's literacy and later cancer awareness. These efforts helped maintain a degree of public visibility, though they did not fully restore the reputation she had once held. At the same time, the broader environment surrounding the British royal family continued to evolve. New generations of royals entered public life, media attention shifted, and older controversies were periodically revisited whenever related stories resurfaced. In this environment, Ferguson's past decisions often returned to public discussion. Years after the original events, journalists and commentators still referred back to the 2010 scandal and the questions it raised. Each time the story reappeared, it reminded audiences of how dramatically her public image had changed since the late 1980s. For someone who had once been introduced to the world as a symbol of warmth and modern energy within the monarchy, the contrast was striking. The woman who had once stood at the center of royal celebration now found herself navigating a reputation shaped by controversy, financial struggles, and the long memory of public scrutiny. When the noise fades, what remains is harder to face. In the years that followed the most intense periods of public controversy, Sarah Ferguson's life moved into a quieter and more uncertain phase. She remained a public figure, but no longer in the way she once had been during the height of royal attention. Health challenges began to shape much of this later period. In recent years, Ferguson publicly shared that she had been diagnosed with breast cancer and later with skin cancer. The treatments required time, privacy, and a shift in priorities. For someone who had spent decades navigating public scrutiny, these moments introduced a different kind of vulnerability. At the same time, her financial and professional life remained complicated. Many of the business ventures that had once been intended to stabilize her finances had either ended or struggled to continue. Companies connected to her name quietly closed or reorganized. Publishing and media opportunities still appeared occasionally, but they were often approached with greater caution by partners aware of the controversies that had followed her career. Even so, Ferguson did not fully disappear from public life. She continued writing books, particularly children's stories and historical fiction. She also remained involved in charitable efforts, especially those connected to children's welfare and cancer awareness. In interviews, she often spoke about resilience and about the importance of learning from past mistakes. The tone of those conversations was usually reflective rather than defensive. Her relationship with the royal family also settled into a complex middle ground. While she was no longer part of the institution in a formal sense, she remained closely connected to her daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie. Family occasions sometimes brought her back into proximity with royal circles. Though her public role remained limited, public opinion toward her, meanwhile, has never fully settled. Some people have gradually softened their views over time, particularly after her openness about illness and the visible closeness she maintains with her daughters. To them, Ferguson represents someone who has endured repeated public embarrassment, yet continues to rebuild her life. Others remain skeptical. For critics, the controversies of the past still raise questions about judgment and responsibility. In their view, the passage of time does not entirely erase the decisions that shaped her reputation. Between those two perspectives lies the complicated space where most public figures eventually find themselves, neither fully restored nor entirely forgotten. They continue forward while the past remains part of the story. Looking back, the arc of Sarah Ferguson's life reflects more than a single scandal or a single mistake. It shows how public admiration can shift, how personal decisions can carry lasting consequences, and how difficult it can be to step outside the expectations attached to a powerful institution like the monarchy. She once stood at the center of a global celebration that seemed to promise a modern royal fairy tale. Decades later, her story is remembered in a more complicated way, as a mixture of warmth, missteps, resilience, and controversy. And that leaves a question that extends beyond one individual. Do we ever truly forgive public figures, or do we simply move on while remembering the moments that disappointed us the most?